Hey,
Hi, Pete.
how's it going?
How's it going?
Good, how you doing?
Thank you. It's a big pleasure to have you here on West Argentina.
Thanks.
Hi,
Awesome.
Ivan. Okay, I'm I'm waiting just 1 minute, people to join us.
Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. Okay, so Nate, it's a big pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you.
You are a terrific musician, and I hope everyone who join us can discover your music today.
Thanks.
And well, for starting, I would like to ask you, how did you get into music? It was where you were a kid?
Yeah, I was a kid. My parents are both musicians. And so when my parents used to have band practice when I was a toddler, and I used to sit on the drums and kind of play around. And so they built me a kit out of spare parts that their drummer gave them, like a floor tom for bass drum and trash can lids for cymbals and stuff like that. So I started playing drums when I was about 2, but then I put them away at age 4 until age 9. I didn't play any music between those ages. And then I pulled the drums out of the closet again when I was 9 and started playing. And then around age 12 or so, I decided that I wanted to do music full time for the rest of my life. And my goal was to never have a day job and just do music. So that's so far so good.
Okay, but you went to a music school, right?
I did, yeah. I went to California Institute of the Arts, which is in Valencia, California. Joe LaBarbera is the drum instructor there. And at the time, Charlie Hayden, the bass player, was there, which was great. Got to study with him too. Yeah, so I went there for 3 years out of high school.
Okay, and you just studied drum there, or you studied bass too?
I studied some bass and I studied some guitar too. Probably 2 semesters of bass and 2 semesters of guitar, something like that. So yeah.
Okay, but you always think that you were a musician, a full-time musician, but playing both instruments? Did you imagine
No,
like that if you were a kid?
well, no. When I was a kid, I imagined that I would mostly play drums. Um, I decided to buy a bass when I started playing guitar when I was about 12 years old. Um, And I decided to buy a bass when I was 16 years old when all of my friends left for music school in high school. And there were no bass players left in our high school. So I bought a bass in order to take over their gigs and just be able to play more. And immediately I started playing a lot on bass. And between ages 16 and 20, I probably played bass and drums equally. 16 to 20, 16 to 21, something like that, that 5 year period. And then between ages 20 and 30, I literally never played bass. Like I probably played on sessions every once in a while. I played on my own music, but I never really did gigs and stuff like that. And when I moved to New York, um, Wayne Krantz kind of took a chance on hiring me to play bass with him, just based on some videos he'd seen of me. And that kind of kickstarted me playing bass again with people. But for that whole period, I was mostly a drummer, but also a guitar player too. Sorry to make it confusing, but I did also play a fair amount of guitar in my 20s. Like I toured with Taylor Hawkins' band, the drummer from the Foo Fighters. I played in his side project called Taylor Hawkins and the Coattail Riders, and I played guitar and sang backgrounds. So, but I mostly saw myself as a drummer. I've always seen myself mostly as a drummer, and then as like a bassist, guitarist second. But now it's kind of it doesn't really matter. It's just I think of myself as a musician who just kind of does a bunch of different stuff. So,
Oh, that's great because I was going to ask you that question. If when you compose your music or when you think on a new tune, you
mhm.
think like a whole musician or just like a drummer, for instance, or for a bass player? Do you
Yeah,
create part by part or as a whole?
kind of as a whole, I mean, I got into the idea of songwriting when I was about 16 or 17, and it was as interesting to me as playing music, and I started kind of writing material for my own project when I was about 20 years old. So, I have 3 records under my own name where I play all the instruments, and it's more singer-songwriter stuff, and I play guitar. And that comes from most of those compositions come from guitar. I've been playing guitar a long time now, and I feel like I have a voice on the instrument and a sense of how I want things to sound harmonically and stuff like that. So um, I, um, I kind of just consider it as a composer, just like, especially with that music, it was mostly composed on guitar. But with four, actually, everything is composed at once. Like I just jam with myself, like I have the synth up and the bass up and the drums up, and then I just play around on all of them until something sounds like music, and then I try to make a song out of it. So that's been a really different process, obviously, because you don't really get to do that in any other kind of musical environment, unless you're like composing in Logic or something like that. And you're like, you put in a drum loop and then play keyboards over it. That's the only way. But in terms of live instruments, I feel like this is a unique way to compose. And that's part of my favorite thing about the Four project is being able to compose in that kind of way, in a live way. So, but
Okay, that's great.
drums are the last thing I think of. To me, drums are kind of inconsequential. Like I care about how the drums sound and that the part's good and that I play well, but it's really the last consideration to me. So,
Okay,
yeah.
that's very nice. Okay, so now you are touring with your own music.
hmm Starting to,
Are you
yes.
presenting your new album?
Yeah, I've been touring a little bit with the Four project. I don't have a label. I don't have management. I kind of do everything myself, which has been challenging because I'm not really an alpha person. So it's been uncomfortable but good to kind of push me into a new role. But I've been just doing little tours here and there. I've done a couple week or 2 week long tours in Europe that I kind of put together myself. Um, and it's been really fun. It's like, the project's only getting better. The more you tour, obviously, the better you get, and the more natural you get on a stage in front of a bunch of people. Um, but it's been really cool. I've learned a lot in terms of like when you're a leader, it's very different than being just the drummer. You're so responsible for the entire energy of the whole set and how you communicate to the audience, and feeling that energy of the audience and trying to bring that into your project and have it be in a sympathetic relationship and all that stuff. So it's been a cool process so far. Of course, the pandemic, like everybody else, it stopped me dead in my tracks because I was supposed to do a big tour in May, like 2 weeks or something in Europe, which for me was a good tour. And I was starting to go back to certain cities and play for the second time, which is like a big step. Like you go play in certain cities and you have one, like a small audience, and then you go back 6 months later and hopefully you have a bigger audience. And I was just about to do that for the first time, and of course everything got canceled. So yeah, just kind of waiting it out to see what happens. But my goal is to continue doing this more. So,
Okay, I think maybe you can go next year if this whole thing pass.
hope
You
so.
can,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the
and
goal.
you can come to Argentina as well. We are
Yeah, I'd
waiting
love
for
to.
you.
That'd be great. I'd love that.
Yes. Did
Yeah.
you have you been in Argentina before?
I never have. I've never been there. A good friend of mine, Wayne Krantz, lives there a few months a year. Do you know him or know of
Yes,
him?
yes. He
So he lives
was
in.
last year, I think, in Buenos Aires,
Yep.
but he came alone.
Oh, he came along.
And
Okay. hmm
yeah, he came alone and played with local musicians last year or 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah. No,
But he was here.
yeah, no, his wife, is from Argentina, so they kind of split time there, and he said he's there now, actually. But he says it's a great city and a great, Buenos Aires is a great city, and the musicians there are great. My screen off, so it
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't turn off.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It's maybe just connection issues.
I'm back. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
here we are.
Um, yeah, so he has nothing but nice things to say about Buenos Aires and the musical community there, and definitely makes it sound like I want to go there. So I'm excited to go there for sure next year,
Okay,
hopefully when this all passes.
we are going to ring all the bells we can so you can make it possible.
Thank you, appreciate that. That's nice.
Yes, it would be nice to have you here. So I
Thank you.
have some questions for the audience.
Okay.
Okay, from the audience, sorry.
Hmm.
For instance, here is one.
Hmm.
How many brains do you have? Because
Definitely
it seems
one.
like you have 4 or 5.
Definitely one brain. This project is fun for me because I wanted to do the most challenging thing for me that I could possibly do. Like, I wanted to make a project that would challenge every part of my existence, musically, mentally, physically, emotionally, socially, everything. And this project to me is the most challenging in all of those aspects because obviously playing multiple instruments at once, I have to be good at all the instruments on their own, and then I have to be able to put them together and keep them all straight, which is super complicated. But I will say, since this is a drum podcast, drummers kind of already do that already. And that's something that we don't think about as drummers. You just think, oh, we're just playing one instrument. But no, we're playing four instruments slash, however many instruments your kit has. But I feel like each limb is responsible for an instrument. And the coordination that we come to as drummers is really unlike any other instrument. Um, as an accomplished bass player or guitar player, the way that drumming splits your brain is a completely different sensation than playing, really fast stuff on a guitar or a bass where you're just kind of using two limbs with your fingers. But with
Yeah.
with the drums, you have to use your entire body and you have to be able to keep your balance with all of your limbs going the whole time. So I think that drummers are best suited for these projects. And it's not a huge stretch to be able to move into that kind of stuff. The huge stretch is A, accepting that it's possible, B, uh, being good at the other instruments. But I think really, um, if you're a good drummer, you have a much better chance of being successful with a project like this than you do if you're a good keyboard player, for instance, who just barely plays drums. Because if there's a good drummer on stage, if he's playing like one note every 4 bars and then just playing a funky groove, an audience is going to love it because they don't need anything else. But if you have like Keith Jarrett level skills on piano and the drummer can't, and as a drummer, the person can't play at all, you're not really going to captivate an audience. Um, this project for me is, uh, I think it works because I'm a good drummer and a good bass player, and I have a strong sense of what I want the music to sound like. And as a keyboard player, to be honest, I'm fairly rudimentary. I'm starting to get more into the instrument, but it's kind of a newer instrument for me. But so the final answer is I have one brain, and I feel like in 15 years, 10 years, many people are going to be doing what I'm doing right now. But it's just that it's so new that to people it's still surprising. So
Yeah, but it's a very interesting way to explore, to play more
mhm.
than one instrument at a time. It's really, really, really enjoyable for us. I am trying to make something like that, but it's not so easy.
It's really hard. And the other things that are hard about it that are interesting is that because it's something that's new, there's a few people who are doing it. Obviously, there's Josh Dion, who's a monster, and there's D'Anthony Parks, who has kind of more of a loop based or more of a sample based non-linear compositional approach to it, more like an improvisational dance approach. But it's a new format, and a lot of people. There's two types of people I'm finding. Sorry, it's the mail. Um, there's two types of people I'm noticing, which is there's the people who are excited by something that's new, and they're like, "Oh, this is great! I've never seen this before. I want to find out more." And then there's the people who are like, I've never seen this before, so it can't be valuable or it can't be relevant because I can't compare it to anything else that's existed before. So it's been interesting for me to kind of run into the second type of person more often than not, in terms of people being like, well, that's just a gimmick, or it's not real music because only one person's doing it, which is obviously ridiculous because, people have been seeing one person on a stage with a guitar and singing, for a 2-hour show for hundreds of years. And that's a one-man band. It's just not as full as mine is. So it's been an interesting process to kind of be at the forefront of this new format. But I think as more people start to do it, as you start to do it, and anybody who's watching, and I have other friends who are starting to do it now. As people start to see it more, then it becomes more of an accepted format. I think it'll actually be easier for everybody. So, but there's a lot of advantages to it, obviously, like just the fact that I can tour by myself with 2 suitcases. I don't have roadies, and I can come to a show, I can come to a venue, I can be set up in 20 minutes because I do my own mixing, my own sound. And then I can play a show, like a dance show, for people for an hour and a half, and they're totally happy. That kind of freedom of not having to coordinate with other band members and pay other band members and pay a management fee and all that stuff, it's very freeing. So I think, Jojo Mayer came and saw me once at New Blue, and he told my friend, he was like, yeah, this really reminds me of the Great Depression in America was in, from 1929 to the mid 30s or whatever. And during that time, because there was no money there was no money for anybody. There was no money in the country. A lot of musicians just started one-man bands in order to make all the money. And he was like equating that to this time now, which is like, there's no money in music, so we're going to see a lot more one-man bands. And this is a perfect example of that, which is a very astute observation. It's a new musical frontier, but there's a lot of practical reasons to do it too. So, but yeah, it's very hard. So
Yeah, it is. So,
yeah,
are you working in some new material now during
yeah,
this pandemic?
yeah, I am. My wife and I moved to a house in Queens, and I'm in the process of building a new studio. So I haven't actually been able to play drums since May 25th. So it's been quite a few months. This is the longest break I've ever had. But when the studio is completed, hopefully in a month or two, I'll have a better format for creating music than I've ever had. It'll look better, sound better. So then I can start really cranking out for stuff. So I'm 2/3 of the way through my new album, and I want to finish the new album by the end of the year. Hopefully that's the goal, and then just continue to make records once a year or every 2 years, something like that. So probably once a year. So that's the goal. So.
Okay, and how do you think the musical scene is going to develop after this? Because lots of places are closing, and that's a
Yeah,
problem for us.
it's going to be It's going to be depressive. I also saw there's a new law that passed in New York, and I can't tell if this is just a law that's going to exist during coronavirus, or if it's a law that's going to carry over post-pandemic. But there's a law currently that says if you're a restaurant, you can't charge separately for the music. So if you serve food and you have music, you can't charge a cover charge for the music, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I mean, on one hand, if it keeps people from congregating in one place longer, it will help to curb the spread of coronavirus. But on another hand, it effectively kills 2/3 of the music venues. So it just means that 2/3 of the gigs are just gone overnight, in New York State, which there's a lot of music venues in New York State, and they were already struggling because they've had no help from our government, and they needed to pay their rents, which are super high, and they haven't had income, and now this happened. So I think it's going to be a real problem. But on the other hand, I think in New York City, I'm seeing there's a lot of people who are leaving, a lot of rich people who are leaving, and they're finding that they're going to be able to do a lot of their work via Zoom or like what we're doing now. And so it might actually start to bring real estate prices down. So I think in 5 to 10 years, we might actually see a new music scene that's more like the 90s or the early 2000s before rent prices were so high that nobody could afford anything. So in the meantime, it's going to be horrible for a few years. I think it's going to be really bad. But in the long term, it might be better. And I know that people are really going to value going to see live music when this is all over. I have dreams about it
We
every
hope
night.
so.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have dreams every night of just like standing in line with people for like a coffee. Like, just that'll be great to just be able to like stand in a line, not wear a mask, and like talk to people. But just the whole thing of being able to come together and celebrate for music will just feel like so positive when this is over. So I think it'll be good in the long run. So
Yeah.
yeah.
If we have luck, it will be.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question is, do you have a routine, a study routine, or you just improvise?
I don't generally. Since I moved, I've been practicing drums every day on a practice pad, trying to do between a half hour to 2 hours a day, to be honest. Um, I practice on one of those moon gel pads that has no rebound, and I practice with two Bs. And I've been working on my stroke, been working on really simple stuff, unisons, um, rudiments, and going through the rudimental ritual, which I never went through. Alan Dawson's rudimental ritual, the thing that he taught Tony Williams and Vinnie Colaiuta and all that stuff. So I learned that, and so I've been trying to do that every day. I've been trying to play keyboards an hour to two every day, which I've never done in my life. I've never practiced keyboards on their own, so I'm starting to do that. But generally, when all my stuff is set up, I don't really have a routine. I just try to allow myself an hour to 2 to 3 to 4 hours a day to do various things, whether it's just practice drums or improvise for 4 or practice a song that I want to make a video of, stuff like that. But for me, I find when I give myself too many routines, then I start to lose interest. For me personally, I had this ambitious goal to tackle learning piano the way that like a school would teach it, like practice scales and then learn how to play like body and soul, and all of these different inversions and like learn jazz standards and all that stuff. And I never worked on it. I never started because to me that was too daunting. It was too big. It was too boxy or something. And once I just decided to learn it the way that I learned every other instrument, which is just play along to my favorite records, see where that takes me, try to learn the voicings from the record, but then put my own little notes in there to make it sound like my own music, stuff like that, then I started to enjoy myself. And that's the way that I've learned every instrument, is just turning to the music that I love for inspiration and kind of taking as much as I can from it. I've never done full transcriptions on drums. For me, it's more been about playing along to records and getting the essence of something and trying to make it my own kind of stuff. So that's generally my routine, is no routine, but I just try to do it every day. So.
Okay. That's great. Here we have a question from Polygon Sandwich.
Okay.
He asks, what's the process of joining living groups like in the jazz scene? I notice a lot of lineup changes with all the artists I follow.
Yeah, there aren't really bands, is the thing. There aren't really bands in the jazz scene. I mean, I'm part of one of the only bands. Kneebody is a real band, right? The Bad Plus is a real band. Like Go-Go Penguin's a real band. There's a bunch of British bands actually that are real bands, but New York, in terms of New York City, there aren't that many. Alas No Axis is a real band that never plays anymore. But generally, it's mostly just a leader and then sidemen. And they try to make it look kind of like a band, or they'll try to make it a band, but it never really lasts. And the reason is because it's very hard to lead. It's very hard to be in a group that's democratic, where you're sharing responsibility, like Kneebody, because it just makes the roles very unclear about who's responsible for what. And it just makes it makes coordinating everything very tricky. And the thing about jazz musicians is they're basically workers for hire. Like Eric Harland just gets calls from everybody that wants to play with Eric Harland, which is everybody. and it's just a long list of people, and then he just fills up his calendar with those people. So you can't start a band with Eric Carlin because he's got 3 years of gigs booked, you know. And most of the successful musicians in New York are like that. They have years of music booked, and maybe they have a week in the middle of there where you can book them for your record, but there's no way you're going to have them, join your band. And part of that is because living in New York is so expensive, and if you want to afford a life in New York as a jazz musician, you have to be working all the time. So you have to be touring all the time to be able to live here for this lifestyle. Or you have to have a teaching job or whatever. But having a band is not very fiscally responsible. It's not, the thing about having a jazz band is it's just not affordable. So like bands that are very successful, Snarky Puppy is another band that's very successful, who's a jazz band, who's an actual band. But they spent 10 years living off of credit card debt, sleeping on people's couches until they got really successful. And that's just not feasible for a lot of people, Like, I wanted to make a career in the music industry, and I didn't want to sleep on people's couches. So I just took gigs my whole life, And luckily with Kneebody, we found a way to make it work because we're all playing with other people, but we're also all committed to Kneebody, So that's the reason that you see personnel changes all the time. It's just very, very hard to keep a band. The second reason is that there are so many great musicians in New York City that you kind of want to play with them all, So you just might be lying in bed one night and you're like, God, I would love to write music around, make a record with Billy Hart on drums, Like I'm just imagining this music where Billy Hart would just sound amazing, maybe Billy Hart and Ben Street on bass. Like, what a great band that would be. So maybe you'll do that record, and then maybe somehow miraculously you'll get funding to do touring for that project and be able to pay those guys. And then you'll tour for one record with them, and then that's it. And then they'll go do some other project with somebody else, separately or together, and then you'll imagine a new project with somebody else. So that's what living in New York is like in a nutshell. So,
Yeah.
but for me personally, I like long-term relationships with musicians and people. A lot of my friends are old friends that I've had since I was in high school or college. I've been with my wife for 15 years. Kneebody's been a band for 20 years. I like the long relationships. I've been playing with Ben Wendell as a sideman on and off for those many years. And the Four Project is a band, even though it's just me, but I just like the idea of one project that I can grow as a project, not just being a sideman who is hired by other people. And I've done that a lot, and I enjoy doing it in fits and spurts, but it's not my goal to be like the best sideman ever. To me, that's very unfulfilling. Just look back on my life and be like, oh, I played with all these people, but it's like, to me, it doesn't contribute as much to like what I want to do as an artist. So I've kind of chosen to not do that as much and focus more on my own thing. So that's a tough call though, because it's hard to kind of turn down a life of like guaranteed tour money to work on your own project. So it's a tricky balance. So thanks for the question.
All right. Then speaking about jazz, many drummers were asking if you have to study jazz as a drummer, even if you don't play jazz.
Absolutely not. No. In fact, don't study jazz. I mean, honestly, I don't really see a way in which jazz will add to your fiscal capabilities. Like, jazz is a non-profit game. The only thing that's profitable about jazz is the scholastic environment. So if you want to make music that's more interesting for people in schools, or if you want to be a teacher yourself, then learn jazz drumming. Otherwise, don't, unless it speaks to you. I mean, the thing about jazz drumming to me, my favorite improvisers of all time are jazz drummers. And that's not because I went to school for jazz. The school that I went to was very liberal, and it was very like, you can do whatever you want with this information. I don't care. You don't have to learn this Philly Joe solo. You don't have to learn, whatever, all of these. You don't have to go through all these books. You don't have to love jazz. Just do whatever you want with music. But I came to a love of jazz drumming on my own specifically because I think it's the purest form of improvisation for me in terms of drums. Like I see the most intellect in jazz drumming, like the way that Tony Williams improvises or Jackie Jeanette or Elvin Jones. To me, that's the most. That has the most spiritual content and the most intellectual content and the most human spirit, and that's the thing that I enjoy about it the most. Um, but I think with music, there's no reason to learn anything that you don't want to unless it speaks to you. That's just my own personal opinion. But if you if you follow the things that you love the most in music, you're gonna get the best at the things that you love, you know. And these things like jazz drumming are just kind of a side, you know, a side uh, note that aren't important. But jazz school people, of course, will tell you that jazz is the most important thing. But that's just because they're jazz school people, and you have to understand that jazz has no real relevance with popular music, and that's why it has to live in a scholastic environment. You know, is because it's not. The thing about jazz that was vital in the 50s and 60s is that it was related to popular music, and then in the 70s it was related to popular music too, and in the 80s still sort of with Miles Davis and all that stuff. Now it's not really related to popular music. I mean, it's starting to be a little bit here and there with, you know, Thundercat and Lewis Cole, Genevieve Artadi,
Yeah.
and, you know, Snarky Puppy, and there's certain projects that kind of cross over. But, you know, I know that, like, for instance, Lewis Cole is a phenomenal drummer. He's one of my best friends, but he's not like, he didn't spend hours and hours like learning Philly Joe solos, for instance. You know, he approached music with trying to uh, learn the most about the aspects of music that he loves, you know, and make that his own thing, you know. And he certainly hasn't lost any cred because he can't play like Elvin Jones or whatever, even though he kind of actually he does a pretty good Jack DeJohnette impression, to be honest. So he does love jazz drumming, but you get my point. I think you should just do whatever you want with music at this point. And sorry for the really long answer, but at this point, because music has no real inherent value anymore, and there's nobody understands where the next valuable platform is going to be, just do whatever you want. Because at this point, I feel like people with large Instagram followers who are just chopping up, you know, they might be making more money than somebody who's touring with Beyonce. Honestly, you know, like the people who are doing clinic tours are probably making more than the drummer of Beyonce, even though it's not musical to just play chops on Instagram. It's like, who cares? If you can make a living out of it, who's to say that that's any less valid than playing 2 and 4 behind Beyonce, who's underpaying you, you know? So really just do whatever you want, I think. So that's
Okay,
all.
that's good. What do you think about the future of drumming? Do you have any thoughts about that? Where are we going to as drummers?
Um, I think I think
It's a very tricky question, I know.
it is. No, I think the future of drumming is that just drummers are going to get better and 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 better. Every generation is going to get better, you know. Um, and that's because of the level of information that's available to us now. Um, to me, like the first successful example of the YouTube generation is Jacob Collier. Like to me, he's the first person who took all the information that was available to him and he made the most out of it. You know, he's obviously absorbed the essence of everything that exists in the musical universe and he's made it into something that's his own. But not only that, but he has more skill on more instruments than probably any human in history. And the only reason that he can exist is because of YouTube and because all this information is free. So if you just apply that to the drums, you're seeing the same thing. I mean, like my friend Zach Danziger is sending me us videos like, you know, every couple of days of like, check out this 10-year-old kid who's just shredding, you know. Or like JD Beck is a perfect example of somebody who's 16 or 17 now, and he's just playing incredibly good, like you know, on a very very high level. And I just think that's because of the amount of of you know of uh, of inspiration that's out there now, you know? So I think the level is just going to get higher and higher and higher. And that's very exciting to me. Like, it's very exciting to just have the instrument move forward and be able to be inspired by younger people, you know? Um, so, and also just to see like, you know, the passing along of influences, you know, like to me, there's all my favorite drummers and I can hear their influences and then I can hear their influences and I can hear their influences. And now I can hear the younger people being influenced by my generation, you know, and even the people younger than me. And that's just really cool. So I think the future is amazing. Like I got to meet Jack DeJohnette once. He saw me play on a gig, and I was playing drums, and he was very complimentary. And he said something to akin to that. He was just like, "Man, the drums have never been better." He's just like, "The drummers now are so good. You know, I'm really not worried about the future of the instrument. It's just going to get cooler and cooler." You know, and as somebody that I revere as one of the gods, the most magical musicians to ever touch the instrument, I thought that was really cool to hear. But that's how I feel too. And in terms of a practical application for the drums, in terms of how we're going to make money, I think drums are always going to be a relevant instrument. There's something about drummers that's technological. It's wired to be in tune to technology. All of my friends who were drummers were the first people who became studio engineers back when that was a novel thing, you know. Myself included. Obviously, 20 years ago, I bought all my own gear and started learning how to record my own stuff. And, you know, I recorded and mixed my own record, you know, 20 years ago when that was still a new thing to do, you know. But I think drummers are really in touch with that aspect of technology. And I think that we're very well suited for the future of technology, you know. Like already we're the ones who run the Ableton Live session if we're playing behind a large, you know, artists. And more people are starting to play two instruments at once because it's cheaper to hire one person to play two instruments, you know. So I think drummers will continue to evolve with technology, and also the multi-instrumental thing will become more common. Yeah, I think drummers will be fine. So yeah.
Okay, yes, we will. Now,
Okay.
another question from Manuel or Manuel, I don't know. How do you
Okay.
feel about contemporary free improvisation? And how is the scene for it in New York?
That's a really good question. There's there's a kind of a set of rules that I've seen that I don't agree with. You know, like um, it's like writing, right? So like, you know, the writers who did that, like William Burroughs or like those literary writers who kind of took the format of the day and then just put it in a blender. It feels like it feels like jazz, free jazz is kind of stuck in that period. It's kind of stuck in the 70s a little bit because there's a lot of people who still think jazz is it's not jazz if it doesn't swing, you know, which I understand that's the origin of jazz, but to me it's not jazz if it's not related to contemporary music. So to me, it's like the swing beat was a dance beat, right? So in the 30s, when
Yeah.
people were dancing, that was jazz and it was popular music. And then what, you know, Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and those people did was they took popular music and made it artistic, and that was jazz. So to hamstring the idea that jazz is only things that are swing music, you're basically trapping it in a period of time because the swing beat has no correlation whatsoever to popular music. You know, a lot of kids don't even know that ding, ding, da ding, ding, da ding was a dance beat. They have no
Yeah.
idea, you know. So I think that free jazz can be a little bit trapped in that same paradigm where it's like, no, we're just basing it on what Coltrane did on Interstellar Space and then taking those rules and applying it to our, you know, to our music now. I hear a lot of that, you know, but then there's a lot of electronic based free music that I think is more relevant, you know, because there's a lot. Obviously, pop music is very electronically based, and I feel like the free jazz, the real free jazz to me is more modular noise music, or like which also is an older art form, but um, you know, that even that existed in 1969, 1970, and it's kind of becoming cool again. But um, to me, it has to have, I feel like it needs to have some kind of relationship to modern music, or it falls into the classical trap, you know. Classical music also was popular music in,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, it
up
was.
until 1920, and then it became scholastic because it was no longer related to popular music. And to me, when it's no longer related to popular music, then it loses its value in a certain way, you know. So I feel like the trap of jazz of free jazz can be that it can be related to older jazz, which I love older jazz and I love hearing new people reinterpret older jazz. I'm not saying that that's not valid. I'm just saying that for me, it can feel a little bit boxy when it's supposed to feel like freedom because it has free in the title, you know. Um, so that's my only opinion of it. But there's obviously a lot of people here doing new things with it. I'm not a part of that scene. I mean, I've done gigs with it with people, but I'm not a part of the scene, even though I love and appreciate free jazz. Um, so that's my answer.
Okay, I think there's an audience for each type of music, maybe
Hmm.
larger or smaller, but there is, and there will
Yeah,
always be.
there will always be, and there will always be an audience for old jazz and new jazz. There will always be an audience for the people who think that swing is the only real jazz, and there will always be an audience for the people who want to hear what the new shit is, you know. Um, so hopefully there's a way to bridge the two, you know, I think.
Yeah, hopefully. So
Hmm.
talk me a little bit about your influences as drummers.
Hmm. Yeah,
What
yeah. Did you want
I said, which drummers do you like from the past, and which drummers do you like from the present?
to? Okay. There's too many to mention, but I'll start at the beginning. I started playing drums because my godfather was playing with my parents when I was a kid. He's on Instagram. His name is Rhythm Ranger.
Okay, we
His
are
name is
waiting to wait for him.
Frank Continola. Yeah, Rhythm Ranger. So follow him. He doesn't really post much drumming videos, but Frank Continola is his name, and he's kind of like a Jim Keltner kind of player. Real, just incredible pocket, very song playing, you know. And he does kind of the best, like half between swing, half between straight kind of train groove you've ever heard, like that kind of in between thing. He's maybe the best in the world at that. Um, so he was my primary, reason for playing the drums. He gave me my first drum kit, and I used to go see him every week when I was 12 or 13. He would play in a bar in Laguna Beach in California, where I grew up, and I could go walk down and stand right behind his head and like watch him play for 4 hours. So I used to go do that every week. So he was a big influence. And then Tristan Bowden was the other huge influence when I was a kid, and still is, who played in bands with my both of my parents from the 70s on. And Tris is also on Instagram. He was the drummer of Kenny Loggins in Chicago, and he was a peer of Jeff Porcaro, and he kind of comes from that school of just immaculate time playing. I saw a video once recently of him playing with Kenny Loggins in 1980 or something, um, and I forgot the name of the song, but the drumming is just astounding. It's a live video, and it's just the time is just so flawless. It's hard to believe. And the most astounding thing is that there's a perfect edit between a gig at the very beginning of the tour and a gig at the very end of the tour, and he wasn't playing to a click, but one is like 6 months prior, and the next one is 6 months later. One's a daytime gig, and one's a nighttime gig, and they did an edit, and they're the exact same tempo and the exact same feel, and everything's exactly the same. So he's like one of the best
Amazing.
time players I've ever encountered. So he was a huge influence for me growing up. I kind of just wanted to be able to do what he could do. Um, and then when I got into high school, I got more into jazz and hip hop and stuff like that. So I got really into Tony Williams and Jack DeJohnette and Vinnie Colaiuta and Gary Husband, all the Alan Holdsworth drummers, and I got really into Wayne Krantz. And I bought Two Drink Minimum, which was the record with Zach Danziger on it. I don't know if you guys know that record, but
Yeah.
to me that record was the genesis. To me that record was the first glimpse of where drumming was going. You know, it was like, oh, he's taking like some like Vinnie Weckl stuff, but I can hear his mind working the way that Jack DeJohnette's mind works or Tony Williams' mind works. It was like a combination of the intellect of those guys with the language of the newer drummers at the time. And that's what I wanted to do with drums is like, I want to have the spirit of Jack DeJohnette and Tony Williams, but the modernity and the groove based stuff of, you know, the newer players. So that was a huge record for me. And then I bought Square Pusher Hard Normal Daddy when I was in high school, which is still maybe my favorite record of his. It was the most like focused kind of jazz, fusion jazz meets Aphex Twin kind of music that he ever made. And that record blew me away, and I was like, I want to be able to do this on a kit, you know. So I kind of started getting into playing along to that music and trying to make it something, you know, when I was 17 or 18. And that, of course, led me down the rabbit hole of all of those artists, you know, like Music and Aphex Twin, who's still one of my current favorite musicians, and Photek, and all those artists who were making that music at that time. And I wanted to be able to play that kind of music. And the first person who did that really successfully, because I lived in California and I couldn't go see Jojo Mayer and Zach Danziger do that live. This was pre, you know, internet, so I could only do what I was around. But my biggest influence for that kind of music was DeAnthony Parks, and still is. I don't know if you guys know DeAnthony Parks. Do you know DeAnthony Parks? Do you know him? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know the rest of us.
Yeah, but to me, he's one of the most important drummers that nobody's heard of, or not enough people have heard of. He should be one of the most famous drummers now, because he has a very singular sound. He doesn't sound like anybody. He's what I would call a true original. But when I heard his approach to that style, it kind of changed my whole thing, because I was like, oh, he kind of did what I loved about what Zach was doing, which is like he took the intellect of the old jazz drummers, but he made it sound like a machine. Like he really sounds like an 8-bit drum machine, but he can improvise for an hour and a half and will never repeat himself. It has that kind of intellect to it, you know, but it has the like robot sensibility of everything sounds like it's coming out of an 8-bit drum machine, you know. It's like the perfect melding of, you know, mind and machine. And that's why I love his project Technoself, because that's the perfect name for him and his project. So he was a huge influence, and still is. And I got to actually play with him a bunch when I was a kid. Not when I was a kid, but in my early 20s. I got to play with him a bunch with this artist Keaton Simons. So I would play either bass or drums, and DeAnthony would sit in. So I've kind of lost touch with him, and I don't get to see him as often as I'd like to, but I've known DeAnthony for a long time. So he was a huge influence. Keith Carlock was obviously a huge influence with Wayne Krantz. And I'm trying to think of other huge influences. I was hugely influenced by Jim Black too. I'm seeing his face, but I'm blanking on his name, which is so stupid. The guy who played with Bill Frisell, Joey Barron. He was a huge influence. I was hugely influenced by hip hop, you know, like Tribe Called Quest records and De La Soul records and stuff like that. And, you know, of course, the D'Angelo records with Questlove, I was hugely influenced by. I was also hugely influenced by, you know, rock records and rock and roll in general. I got to see Dave Grohl play with Queens of the Stone Age when I was 21.
Great drama.
Yeah, and that was one of the best drum performances I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, I didn't know that he was a good drummer, to be honest. I was like, I like the Foo Fighters and I love Nirvana, but I didn't really know what he was capable of on the drums. But I got to see him perform with Queens of the Stone Age in Boston when I was on tour with The Calling, which was a rock band I was in. in the early 2000s. And it was, as I said, it was one of the best drum performances I've ever seen. It was just from note one to the last note. It was just perfectly energetic, performing. And the groove was so strong and the grid was so tight and the intent was so strong. It was just some of the best drumming I've ever seen. So he's a big influence on drums. Paul Motian is a big influence talking about free jazz. I think he's a real reductionary. He's the opposite of Instagram shoppers. He's a very reductionary, fill in the blanks with your own intellect. He leaves a lot to the imagination, which I think is incredible, and takes a certain depth as a musician that's hard to get across in the Instagram generation, where you have to show your best abilities in 1 minute, So he's a huge influence. God, there's so many others that I'm probably blanking on right now. Those are probably the biggest influences for me. And then in terms of contemporaries, there are so many that are incredible. Marcus Gilmore comes to mind as somebody who's really blows me away every time I see him play. Dan Weiss is both a contemporary and an inspiration to me, because I used to see him before I moved to New York. Shane Ensley, the trumpet player of Kneebody, used to say when I lived in California, he was like, Dan Weiss is like the East Coast Nate Wood, which to me still seems like a really ridiculous comparison, because we don't really sound anything alike. But in terms of just taking the music wherever we want it to go, I really love that about Dan's playing. And I used to see him every time I came to New York. I would see him play at the 55 bar with Dave Binney. And he's one of the greatest improvisers on the instrument, I think, that's alive now. So there's a lot of other great drummers. Like, I've obviously gotten to play a lot with Mark Juliana since moving to New York. I got to hear Mark right before I moved to New York, about 10 years ago, and I felt like he was the most similar to me of any drummer I've ever heard. And that was cool. It was great to hear somebody who was like, oh, he obviously likes Zach Danziger and Square Pusher and hip hop in the same way that I do, So he's been a good friend and a great person to play with, and talk about drums. Like, I've gotten to tour with a lot of these musicians too, and we just geek out about drums and grip and how to hold the sticks and, oh, check out this guy on Instagram or whoever, So drummers are really cool in that way, I think, in terms of sharing information and all that stuff. And then other contemporaries, J.D. Beck's great. I mean, he's younger than me, so he's not a contemporary, but I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot, but that's a lot of names for you. So there you go.
That's okay. Thank you. So a question about your drum kit. Which Gretsch drum kit do you have, and why did you choose that kit?
Yeah, I have the American USA Customs. I've been playing the USA Custom since I was about 17. I became a Gretsch artist when I was about 21. They called me because I was touring with that group, The Calling, who was really famous at the time. And they sent me a Renown kit for touring, which was a great kit for that time. It was a little bit louder than the USA Customs. But the USA Custom has always felt like the right balance to me of sustain and attack, brightness and warmth. I'm not a huge fan of the broadcasters, to be honest. To me, they're a little slow and round, and they feel a little bit like I'm fighting with them a little bit. USA Customs to me are the most responsive drums that I've ever played, in terms of they just give me back what I want, but they also surprise me like a good partner should, whereas like a Yamaha drum to me feels like they give back, but they're not going to surprise you, and that's what makes me lose interest in drums like that. Gretsch, always there's an element of surprise, like, oh, I didn't know a 12-inch tom can make that sound, and that's what's kept me with Gretsch all these years, is I'm still surprised by the sounds my drums can make. And I feel like the USA Custom is the most surprising sounding of the batch, I think the Brooklyn sound great too, but those are a little bit closer to a Yamaha with the triple flanger shoots and stuff like that. Beautiful sustain, big attack, gigantic sound. I love them, but they don't surprise me as much as the USA Custom. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yes, that's a great kit. So,
Yeah.
Nate, I'm going to say something short in Spanish for
Okay.
our Spanish speakers.
Hmm.
Gente, queremos agradecerle a Capital Sound, que es la distribuidora de Gretsch en Argentina, Best Music, donde pueden conseguir todas las baterías y productos Gretsch. Y bueno, les agradecemos desde ya su presencia. Nate, thank you for being with us. It
Thanks a lot.
was an honor and a pleasure talking with you, and we hope to have you again soon.
All
And
right.
of course,
Thanks so much.
playing in Argentina too.
I would love that. Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much
As
for
I
having
said
me.
before, yes, we are going to ring all the bells we can, so
That's
we
awesome.
can make it possible.
Thank you so much.
So, no, you're welcome, and we'll keep in contact. Thank you
Okay.
so much for being here,
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
and
Thanks for having
see
me.
you
Thanks for
soon.
watching, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and see you next live. Bye,
Okay.
Nate. Thank
All right.
you.
Bye. Thanks.